My name is Juno, and my mother told me my father abandoned us when I was 3 weeks old. She told that story at every dinner table, every birthday, every parent-teacher conference for 29 years. She collected $160,000 in life insurance money after he died in 2008, and she bought a house in Carmichael with it. Today, a woman I had never met walked into my office at the Crocker Art Museum and handed me a dented Clark's shoebox with 41 Polaroids inside. Every one of them dated in blue ballpoint ink by a man I was told I never met, including one dated October 14, 1994, of him holding me when I was 3 weeks old. I'm Juno Petrov. I'm 29 years old. I work in archival preservation at the Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento, and 3 months ago a woman named Marisla changed the shape of my entire life in about 19 minutes. Before I tell you what happened at my mother's 60th birthday dinner, and before I tell you how a pastor's wife at Ella Dining Room and Bar became the first person to say out loud what I'd been afraid to say for 29 years, let me just ask you this. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you haven't. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to the winter I was 7 years old, when I asked my mother why we didn't have any pictures of my dad. We were in the kitchen of the old apartment in Rancho Cordova, the one with the yellow linoleum floor and the dishwasher that never worked right. My mother was making soup. I remember she stopped stirring and she turned the burner down very slowly, the way she always did when she was about to tell me something I wasn't supposed to ask about. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, a blue and white checkered one that had been her mother's, and she sat down across from me at the little formica table we'd bought at a yard sale in Folsom. She said, "Juno, your father was not a good man. He didn't want you. He didn't want me. He left when you were a baby and he never looked back." She paused. "There are no pictures because I don't keep pictures of people who didn't want us." I was 7. I believed her. Of course I believed her. She was my mother. And then she said something I didn't understand until much later. She said, "Someday someone might come and tell you a different story. They might have papers. They might have pictures. They might have a box." She looked at me very steadily across that little formica table. She said, "You be careful who you believe, baby. People lie about the dead." I remember the soup smelled like dill and carrots. I remember the checkered dish towel had a small scorch mark on the corner where it had once touched the burner. I remember my feet didn't reach the floor and I was swinging them under the chair because I didn't know what else to do with my body. And I remember thinking my mother was the bravest woman in the world, raising me alone, and that anyone who tried to tell me otherwise must be a liar. It took me 22 years to realize she wasn't warning me. She was rehearsing. My mother's name is Lenora Petrov, and she is, by any objective measurement, a woman who has done well for herself. She's a top-selling real estate agent at a firm in Fair Oaks. She drives a Lexus RX that she leases every 3 years. She has a closet full of St. John knits, and she keeps a bowl of expensive hard candies on her desk at the office, the ones wrapped in gold foil from a specialty shop in Carmichael. She remarried when I was 19 to a man named Gregory Hollies, a widower who owns 3 dental practices in the Sacramento area, and she threw herself a wedding that cost more than my first car. Gregory is kind to me in the distant way that stepfathers often are, the kind of man who remembers my birthday but not what I do for a living. He thinks my mother hung the moon. He is not, I have come to understand, a man who asks questions. My mother likes to say she raised me by herself. She says it in a particular way, with a small sigh at the beginning, like the words cost her something. She said it at my college graduation, standing next to me in a navy blue dress with pearl buttons, when my advisor came over to shake her hand. She said it at my cousin's wedding in Modesto, when a man she didn't know asked where my father was. She said it on the phone to her real estate clients, usually when they mentioned their own kids. I raised Juno by myself. From the time she was a baby, her father was not in the picture. And then the sigh, always the sigh. What she didn't say What I now know she worked very hard to never say was my father's name. His name was Dmitry Anatolievich Petrov. He was born in 1962 in Ohio to Russian immigrant parents who ran a bakery in Dayton. He was an electrician by trade. He had a younger sister and apparently a mother who made pelmeni from scratch every Christmas until the year she died. He met my mother in 1993 at a wedding in Elk Grove. He was 31. She was 28. They married 4 months later at a Russian Orthodox church. My mother has since pretended she never set foot in. I have his last name, and I have never, in 29 years, been allowed to ask what it meant. I always assumed his family hated us. That's what my mother implied. His people didn't want anything to do with a baby, she'd say, the rare times it came up. They were cold people. You're better off not knowing them. And so I didn't look them up. I didn't ask. I built my life on the foundation my mother gave me, which was, I now understand, a foundation made entirely of dust and a single carefully constructed lie. I'm telling you all of this so you understand what it meant when Marisla walked into the museum. It was a Tuesday in late September. I remember because I had just come back from my lunch break at the little cafe across from the Crocker, the one that makes an okay latte and a great chicken salad, and I was about to start my afternoon shift in the paper conservation lab. I had on my work smock, the beige canvas one with the coffee stain on the left pocket that never quite came out, and my hair was pulled back because I was going to be working with an 1890s lithograph that had some foxing that needed attention. I was in a good mood. I had RSVP'd to my mother's 60th birthday dinner that morning. It was coming up in 11 days. A Friday night at Ella Dining Room and Bar downtown, 22 guests, the big production she'd been talking about for months, and I was already dreading it, but I'd put it on my calendar and I'd bought her a gift. A first edition of a Joan Didion book she'd once mentioned liking. I don't know why I still bought her thoughtful gifts. Maybe because I write thank you notes. It's a thing I do. Habit. Our front desk attendant, a sweet kid named Kaylee, buzzed my extension and said, "Juno, there's a woman here asking for you by name. She says she's family." I remember I laughed a little. Family? What kind of family? "She says she's your aunt." The room tilted slightly. I put my coffee down. "I don't have an aunt. My mother is an only child. Gregory has no siblings." I walked out of the lab and down the long hallway to the front lobby, and I saw her standing there, a woman maybe in her mid-60s, wearing a dark green Columbia rain jacket and carrying a dented cardboard shoe box under her arm. She had my father's eyes. I knew it before she said a word. I had seen those eyes exactly once, in a photograph at my grandmother's funeral, my mother's mother, my Russian grandmother, who I barely knew, and I had been told at the time it was someone from the old country. Those eyes. The same deep-set, slightly hooded eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. She said, "My name is Marisla Petrov. I'm your Aunt Mars. I'm your father's sister. I've been waiting 17 years to give this to you." She held out the shoe box. My chest tightened. I remember the lobby was empty except for Kaylee pretending not to listen, and I remember a guy in a UPS uniform walked in behind us and made a delivery to the front desk, and neither of us moved. I couldn't move. I just stared at this woman and at the box in her hands, which was an old Clark's shoebox, the kind of shoebox my grandmother used to keep buttons in, with a faded red and blue label on the side and a dent in the lid like it had been sat on once a long time ago. And I said the only thing I could think of to say. I said, "My mother told me he didn't want me." Aunt Mars looked at me for a long moment. Her face did something I will never forget. It was not pity. It was not anger. It was something deeper and older and more tired. She said, "Honey, he wanted you so much it killed him, and I can prove it. Let me take you back even further, because you need to understand the texture of the lie before you can understand the Polaroids." I grew up in an apartment with my mother, just the two of us, from my earliest memory until I was 19. We moved 3 times in my childhood, always within a 20-mile radius of Rancho Cordova, always to slightly nicer places. By the time I was in middle school, we were in a rented townhouse off Zinfandel Drive with a little patio where my mother grew tomatoes in terracotta pots. She worked long hours. She sold real estate during the day and she waitressed at an Applebee's in the evenings until I was in about 5th grade, when her real estate career took off and the waitressing stopped. She was, I will say this honestly, a present mother. She came to my orchestra recitals. She packed me lunches. She wrote notes to teachers in neat cursive handwriting. She made holidays into events with themes and decorations and too much food. She was never, ever cruel to me. She was, in many ways, a good mother. She was also, I now understand, performing an enormous amount of grief that was not hers to perform. Every few months, usually around some trigger I didn't understand at the time, my mother would have what she called her blue days. She would lie on the couch. She would play Sarah McLachlan records. She would drink 1 glass of white wine, never more, and she would tell me how hard it had been. How hard, how hard. I was 28 years old, baby. I had a 3-week-old daughter. Your father took 1 look at you and said he couldn't do it. He packed a bag. He was gone by the time you woke up from your nap. She would cry, a small, controlled crying, not the kind that leaves your face wrecked, but the kind that leaves your eyes pretty. I don't want you to hate him, but I want you to know I did everything for you, everything. And I would put my head on her shoulder and I would tell her I loved her, because I was a child, because she was my mother, because I had no reason not to believe her. The story never wavered. 3 weeks old. 1 look at me. He said he couldn't do it. He was gone. And when he died in 2008, when I was 13, the story got an ending. He drank himself to death in Reno. It's very sad, but I'm not going to pretend I'm grieving a man who abandoned us. I remember being 13 and feeling strangely guilty that I didn't feel anything. My mother seemed almost triumphant about his death, in a quiet way, the way you are when a long enemy finally stops being a threat. I interpreted my own lack of feeling as proof that her story was true. If he had mattered, surely I would feel something. I now know the life insurance check arrived 4 months after he died. $160,000. I saw the paperwork eventually, but not for a very long time. At the time, all I knew was that my mother finally got some money from a settlement and that we were moving into a house. A real house. In Carmichael, with a lemon tree in the backyard and a pool that didn't quite work and a little room on the side she said could be my art room. I was 13. I thought we'd won the lottery. We moved in on a Saturday in May 2009. I remember the real estate sign was still up in the yard. I remember my mother cried when she unlocked the front door. I remember she said, "Baby, this is ours. Nobody can take this from us." And I remember, and this is the part that, knowing what I know now, makes me sick, she said, "This is the house your father owes you. This is him finally paying for what he did." He had been dead for 4 months. He had just, unknowingly, bought us a house. In the years after that, my mother's story calcified. The retelling became fluent, practiced, almost glossy. At my high school graduation, she told the story to my AP English teacher in the parking lot. At my college graduation, she told it to my advisor. When I moved to my first apartment in Midtown Sacramento at 22, she told the leasing agent. Just the 2 of us our whole lives. Her father was not in the picture. We've been through so much. The sigh, always the sigh. And I would stand there next to her, feeling a vague embarrassment, never quite understanding why. It took me years to identify the feeling. The feeling was my body knowing something my brain didn't. Let me tell you about a few specific moments, because I want you to understand how careful she was. When I was 16, I took a high school genetics unit, and we did a project where we had to chart our family tree and include inherited traits. I came home with the worksheet and I asked my mother for information about my father's side. Just names, just dates. She was at the kitchen island making a salad. She set down the knife. She turned to me and she said very gently, "Sweetie, I don't know much about his family. We weren't together long enough. You can just write unknown on that side." And then she said, "You know, I always thought it was a little strange that schools make kids do these projects. Not everyone has a tidy family. You don't owe a stranger your history, baby. I wrote unknown on the worksheet. I got an A. When I was 21 and doing an ancestry kit out of curiosity, my mother asked me, casually over the phone, what the results had said. I said they'd said I was part Russian and part Filipino, which I knew, and also a small percentage from some Baltic region I hadn't expected. I said it was interesting, but not surprising. She was quiet for a second and then she said, "Those tests are very unreliable. I wouldn't put too much stock in them. Also, honey, you should be careful about the matches they give you. There are a lot of people who reach out on those sites who are not well. People looking for money. People looking for attention. I've heard stories." I remember she said it in the exact same gentle, concerned tone she used when she told me about boyfriends she thought weren't good enough for me. I had matches on that site, dozens of them. Some of them had last names I recognized. I never looked. I didn't want to worry her. I didn't want to betray her. I deleted the account. When I was 25, my stepfather Gregory made an offhand comment at a Christmas dinner. He said, "Juno, I think you actually look a lot like your grandmother Petrov. There's a picture your mom has somewhere, I think. Isn't there, Len?" My mother's smile froze just for a second. Then she laughed and said, "Oh, Greg, no, that was a picture of my Aunt Irina. It's not Juno's side at all. You're always mixing them up." Gregory looked confused for a second and then shrugged and moved on. The conversation moved on. Nobody mentioned it again. But I remember, that night, lying in bed in the guest room, thinking about that frozen half-second in my mother's face. Thinking about how hard she was working. Thinking about what, and not letting myself finish the thought. I want to tell you about one more thing, because it's the thing that, looking back now, should have told me everything. When I was 27, 2 years ago, I was helping my mother clean out a storage unit she had been paying for since 2009. She had decided she was done with it. 18 years of Rubbermaid bins she hadn't opened in a decade. We were there on a Saturday morning, and she was in a strange mood, quieter than usual, and I was opening bins and sorting things into piles. In one of the bins, near the bottom, I found a yellow manila folder with a rubber band around it. The rubber band had dried out and it broke when I touched it. I opened the folder. It was full of papers. Bank statements from 2008. Letters from the electrician's union benefits office. A document that said Declaration of Custodian across the top. I picked it up and I started to read it, and my mother walked over very quickly, faster than I had ever seen her move, and she took it out of my hands and she said, "Oh, baby, that's just some old divorce paperwork. You don't need to look at that. It's upsetting. Let me take care of that." She put the folder into her purse. She walked out to the car and she put the purse in the trunk. She came back and she said, "Let's go get lunch. I'm done with this. We can come back another day." We never came back. She had almost let me see everything, 2 years before Aunt Mars walked into the museum. My mother had gotten sloppy for a minute and she had caught herself. I had walked past the truth in a storage unit in Rancho Cordova, and I had handed it to her when she reached for it, because she was my mother, and because she said it was upsetting, and because I was trained to trust her more than I trusted my own eyes. There's another small one I keep thinking about. When I was about 30 weeks into a relationship with a man named Cal, I asked my mother if she wanted to meet him. I was 23. She said, "Oh, baby, of course. Bring him to the house. I'd love to." When he arrived, she was warm and charming, and she made him feel like a prince. She asked him about his family. She asked him where his parents lived. She asked him if he was close to his dad. Cal answered all of this politely. And then my mother turned to me in front of him and she said, "Juno's never had that, with a father. She hasn't had a man in her life since she was a baby. I've had to be everything for her. It's a lot for one woman." Cal looked uncomfortable. I looked down at my plate. The conversation moved on. She was good at this. She was so good at this. She could work her version of me into any conversation, at any dinner, at any moment, without it ever feeling forced. I was a character in her story, and she had rehearsed every line. The only person who never had a line was me. I was supposed to sit there and nod and look like a daughter raised by a woman too strong to be broken. That was my entire job, and I had been doing it, without knowing I was doing it, since I was old enough to understand the word father. Have you ever had to stay silent to protect yourself, even when every part of you wanted to speak up? Tell me in the comments. Tell me the story you spent years not telling. I want to know. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe because this story is about to turn. Aunt Mars and I sat in a small conference room at the museum for 2 hours. I told Kaylee to reschedule my lab work. I told my supervisor I had a family emergency, which was the first time in my life that sentence had been true in a way that involved actual family. I took Aunt Mars to the little conference room with the glass walls that we use for donor meetings, and I shut the door, and I asked her to please start at the beginning. She opened the Clark's shoebox on the table between us. The Polaroids were not loose. They were neatly rubber-banded in a stack, on top of a folded sheet of yellow legal paper. Mars peeled the rubber band off with careful fingers. The Polaroids were a little sun-faded on the backs, but the fronts were still vivid, that particular milky saturated Polaroid color. And every single one of them had writing on the bottom white border, in blue ballpoint ink, in a left-slanted handwriting that looked a little like mine. Each one was dated. Mars pulled the top one off the stack. A photograph of a younger version of herself, maybe early 30s, sitting next to a man with dark hair and hooded eyes on a porch swing somewhere, both of them holding coffee mugs. The bottom border said, in blue ink, Mars and D, July 4, 1993, Dayton. "That's your dad," Mars said, 2 months before he met your mother. The man had my face. I don't know how else to say it. I had spent 29 years looking for myself in the mirror and wondering why I couldn't find my mother there. And now, a dead man was looking up at me from a 31-year-old Polaroid with my exact face. Mars slid the next one across. Dimitri standing in a kitchen, laughing, a cigarette in one hand. D. Cleveland wedding, Sept 1993. This is the week he met Lenora. Another one. Dimitri and my mother, arms around each other, my mother in a red dress I had never seen, smiling in a way I had never seen her smile. D and L engagement, Dec 1993. Another, a wedding. My mother in a white dress with a Russian Orthodox priest, my father in a dark suit, my Aunt Mars behind them in a bridesmaid's dress. Wedding, Feb 1994. I was looking at my parents' wedding. I had been told there was no wedding. I had been told they had barely been together. My stomach drops. Mars kept going. She was crying a little, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't interrupt speech. Dimitri was my big brother. He was 6 years older than me. He was the kindest man I ever knew. He met your mother in September of 93 and he was obsessed with her. He thought she hung the moon. He married her in February of 94 because she told him she was pregnant with you and he wanted to do right by you. They had you in September of 94. You were born September 23rd. You were a beautiful baby. I flew out from Ohio for your birth. I held you when you were 2 hours old. She slid another Polaroid across. A young Mars, sitting in a hospital chair, holding a newborn. Me and you, Sept 2394, Sutter Memorial. I was looking at myself, 2 hours old, in the arms of a woman I had met 17 minutes ago. My mother's story was 3 weeks old. 3 weeks old and he left. Mars slid the next one across very slowly, like she knew what she was doing to me. It was a Polaroid of Dimitri sitting in an armchair, in a room with afternoon light coming through a window, holding a tiny bundled baby against his chest. He was looking down at the baby's face. He was smiling the smile of a man who had just been handed his entire reason to be alive. The border read, in blue ballpoint, in his left-slanted handwriting, Juno, 3 weeks old, Oct 14, 1994. I was 3 weeks old in that photograph. I was 3 weeks and 2 days old because I was born September 23, and October 14 is 3 weeks and 2 days later. This is the day, according to my mother, that had already come and gone by the time my father looked at me once and decided he couldn't do it. This is the day he had, in her telling, already been gone for days or weeks. He was holding me. He was holding me like I was made of glass, and also like I was the only thing he'd ever wanted. I could not speak for a long time. Mars kept going through the stack, slowly, gently, laying out Polaroid after Polaroid. Me at 6 weeks old in his arms. Me at 3 months in a high chair with him feeding me applesauce. Me at 6 months sitting on his lap at Christmas next to a tree. Me at 9 months in a stroller in what looks like Sutter's Fort, him pushing. Me at my first birthday, a blurry shot of me with frosting on my face and him kissing the top of my head. The last dated photograph in the stack was from March of 1996. Juno, 18 Mo, last visit. Me 18 months old, asleep on his chest on a couch I did not recognize. After March of 96, Mars said, your mother stopped letting him see you. She filed some kind of order, I don't remember what it was called. She told him he couldn't be around you anymore. She told everyone he was an alcoholic and dangerous. He wasn't, Juno. I promise you he wasn't. He drank a little after, because of what she did. But he was not a drunk when he was with you. He was a father. I said, why did she stop letting him see me? Mars looked at the yellow legal paper still folded in the bottom of the shoebox. She picked it up. She unfolded it. She slid it across to me. It was a letter, in the same left-slanted blue ballpoint handwriting, dated April 12, 1996. It was addressed to Marisla. It was signed Dimitri. It was 2 pages long. I read it twice. The letter said, in language that I will not quote fully but will summarize for you, that my mother had found out he had named me as the primary beneficiary on his life insurance policy through the electricians' union. $160,000, payable on his death, to be held in trust for me until I turned 25. My mother had wanted the policy changed to pay directly to her. My father had refused. He'd told her that if anything happened to him, the money was for my education and my future, not for her. My mother had then, according to the letter, told him that if he didn't change it, she would make sure he never saw me again. She would file a protective order claiming he was an alcoholic and unstable. She would move. She would change her phone. She would, in his words, erase me from Juno's life the way she has erased her own mother and her own sister. He wrote, Mars, if anything happens to me, I need you to find Juno when she's grown and tell her. I don't care how long it takes. Tell her I wanted her. Tell her I fought for her. Tell her I was there. The letter ended. If Lenora wins, at least make sure she doesn't win forever. My father died on a Thursday in January 2008. He was 45 years old. The cause listed on the death certificate was cirrhosis, which I now understand was the predictable end of 12 years of trying to drink away the loss of his daughter. He had been living in a studio apartment in Reno. He had, by the time he died, given up on ever finding me, because my mother had moved us 3 times and changed our phone every time and told everyone she knew that if Dmitry Petrov came around, she was not to be told. Mars had tried to find me. Mars had hired a man in Dayton once to try to locate my mother, and she had been told my mother had legally changed her last name. This turned out to be a lie, but Mars didn't know that. My mother kept the last name. She just stopped using it on any document Mars could search. The life insurance paid out in May of 2008, because I was 13, because the policy had been written to pay into a trust for me, to be released when I turned 25. Because my mother was my legal guardian and my father had died intestate with regard to his custodial arrangements, because he had no contact with me and no lawyer handling his estate actively. Because my mother went to the union and presented herself as the grieving, abandoned single mother of the deceased's only child, and she presented my birth certificate, and she presented her guardianship, and she convinced the trust administrator that the best course of action was to release the funds to her for my benefit. She signed a form. She swore in writing that the funds would be held and used exclusively for my education and care. She bought a house. I turned 25 4 years ago. Nobody ever told me there had been a trust. I paid for college with student loans and a scholarship and summer jobs. My mother told me she was saving up to help me with a down payment on my first apartment. She gave me a check for $3,000 when I moved in, and she told me that was the best she could do. I thanked her. I wrote her a thank you note. She had bought a house with my money. A house she still lives in. A house she has never, not once, invited me to consider as my inheritance. Aunt Mars said, "Juno, I knew about the trust. Dimitri told me in one of his last letters. I didn't know your mother had gotten the money released because I couldn't find you. I've been looking for you since 2008, 17 years. I finally found you 6 weeks ago when a woman in our family's church group saw an article you wrote for a Sacramento Arts Quarterly and recognized your last name. I drove out here from Stockton last night. I stayed in a Best Western off Richards Boulevard. I couldn't sleep. I've been waiting to give you this shoebox since I was 47 years old." I said, "My mother's 60th birthday party is in 11 days. Mars didn't say anything. I said, "Can I keep the Polaroids?" She slid the whole Clark's shoebox across the table. She said, "They've been yours since 1996. I was just holding them." That night I did not go home. I drove to my best friend Sabine's apartment in East Sacramento, and I sat on her couch with the shoebox on my lap, and I did not cry, which surprised me. Sabine made me tea. Sabine looked at the Polaroids for a long time, and when she looked up she said, "Juno, your mother stole your father from you, and then she stole his money, and then she made you thank her for it." I said, "I know." Sabine said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to go see a lawyer in the morning." His name was Theo Kwan. I found him the old-fashioned way, which is to say, Aunt Mars gave me his name. Because it turns out my father had a lawyer. A probate attorney in Stockton, 81 years old now but still working 3 days a week out of a small office above a tax preparation place on Pacific Avenue. A man named Theo Kwan who had represented my father's estate in 2008. My father did not have much. A used Toyota Camry, about $4,000 in a checking account, and a storage unit in Reno. But Theo Kwan had been my father's lawyer for other things, before the death. My father had consulted him in 1996, after my mother had started her campaign to cut him out of my life. Theo Kwan had helped him write the letter designating me as the beneficiary of the life insurance policy through the electricians' union, and he had filed a sealed affidavit with the probate court in San Joaquin County in 1996, documenting my mother's pattern of interference and my father's request that, in the event of his death, the trust administrator be instructed to verify the use of any funds released to my mother. This affidavit had been sitting in a sealed court file for 29 years. It had never been opened because it had never needed to be opened, because my father had never died in a circumstance where the trust had to be challenged. It had just been sitting there, waiting. Mr. Kwan was a small, extremely neat man in his 80s. He wore a gray cardigan over a white button-down shirt. He had half-frame reading glasses on a chain. His office smelled faintly of peppermint and old books. He had a framed photograph of his grandchildren on his desk, and a little ceramic cat his daughter had made him in the 5th grade. He listened to my entire story. When I was done, he took off his reading glasses and he said, "Ms. Petrov, I'm going to say something you should hear clearly. Your father was one of the most decent men I ever represented. He loved you very much, and he was preparing for the exact situation you are now in. Everything you need is already in place. It has been in place for 29 years. He explained, in plain English because I asked him to. Here's what he told me. Number 1. The $160,000 life insurance payout had been structured as an irrevocable trust for my benefit, administered by the Electricians Union's Benefits Office, with my mother named as custodian but not beneficiary. The trust document, which he had helped draft in 1996, explicitly required the custodian to submit annual reports to the Union's Benefits Office documenting the use of funds for my education and care, with receipts, until the funds were dispersed in full by my 25th birthday. My mother had submitted exactly one annual report, in 2009, claiming she had used the funds to purchase a home for Juno's stability. She had never submitted another one. The benefits office, which had lost a great deal of its institutional knowledge due to retirements and a data migration in 2015, had never followed up. Number 2, my father had filed the sealed affidavit in 1996. If that affidavit were now unsealed and presented to the union's benefits office and to a probate court, it would document his clear instruction that any misappropriation of trust funds by my mother should trigger a full accounting and clawback proceeding, and that I, as the sole beneficiary, had standing to bring that proceeding as an adult. I could bring it now. I was 29 years old. I was 4 years past the age at which the trust should have been fully disbursed to me. Number 3, the house in Carmichael, which my mother had purchased in 2009 for $190,000 and which was now worth approximately $710,000, had been bought with trust funds that belonged to me. A civil suit could pursue a constructive trust on the house itself, which in California means that a court could find that my mother holds the house in trust for me and order it either sold and the proceeds returned to me or transferred to me directly, with accounting for appreciation and for any legitimate expenses incurred. Number 4, the union's benefits office, if notified of the misappropriation, was required under the terms of the original trust to pursue recovery. My mother had signed, in 2008, a sworn declaration that the funds would be used exclusively for my education and care. That sworn declaration, submitted under penalty of perjury, could be referred to the San Joaquin County District Attorney for prosecution if she had lied. She had lied. Mr. Kwan said, "Ms. Petrov, you have a number of options. You can pursue a civil recovery. You can pursue a criminal referral. You can do both. You can pursue the constructive trust on the house. You can also, and this is important, simply walk away and do nothing, because nothing is also a valid choice. I will not tell you what to do. But I will tell you that I have been carrying your father's affidavit in a file cabinet behind me for 29 years, and I have been waiting for someone to ask the question you came here to ask. And I am prepared, if you want me to file every single one of those motions this week." I said, "My mother's 60th birthday dinner is 10 days from now." Mr. Kwan looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Are you going?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Then I will have everything ready to file the following Monday. What you do on Friday night is between you, your mother, and the people at her table. My job is to be ready on Monday." We shook hands. As I was leaving, he said, "One more thing." He pulled open a desk drawer and handed me a small sealed envelope. My name was written on it in blue ballpoint, in the same left-slanted handwriting I was coming to recognize. He said, "Your father left this for you. He asked me to hold it until I met you. He said if we never met, I should destroy it unread. I have carried it in that drawer for 29 years. I took it. I did not open it there. I put it in my purse and I walked out of his office, past a ficus plant and a coat rack and a framed photograph of a fishing trip, and I got in my Honda Civic with 182,000 miles on it, and I sat in the parking lot for a long time before I drove home. I did not open the letter for 4 days. I was afraid of it. When I finally opened it, on a Tuesday night in my apartment in Midtown, it was one page, handwritten in the same blue ballpoint. It said that my father loved me, that he was sorry, that he knew what my mother would tell me, that he knew there was a chance I would believe her, and that if I did, he didn't blame me because a child believes her mother, that he had left the Polaroids with Mars because the Polaroids would tell me what words couldn't. And at the bottom, in a different kind of handwriting, shakier, like it had been added at a different time, he had written, "Juno, if you are reading this, I am already dead, and I need you to know one thing. You were wanted. You were wanted so much. Don't let anyone rewrite that." I cried for about 40 minutes, and then I put the letter in a drawer, and I got ready to go to my mother's birthday party. Ella Dining Room and Bar is a restaurant on 12th Street in downtown Sacramento, with high ceilings and soft candlelight and white tablecloths and good bread in a basket. My mother had reserved the back private dining room for 22 guests. She had ordered flowers. She had printed custom menus with her monogram on them. She had invited her real estate colleagues and her new best friend from Pilates and the pastor who had married her to Gregory, Pastor Alden Briggs and his wife Corin Briggs, who I had met twice before and who had been very kind to me both times. She had invited Gregory's 3 adult kids from his first marriage. She had invited 2 of my college friends, which I had specifically asked her not to do. She had notably not invited Aunt Mars because she didn't know Aunt Mars existed. She had not invited Theo Kwan. She had, however, invited me, and I had brought a gift. I arrived at 6:45 p.m. I was wearing a dark green wrap dress and the small pearl earrings my mother had given me for my college graduation. I was carrying a gift bag with the first edition Joan Didion book wrapped inside and a second item in a plain manila envelope. My mother had set a place for me at her left hand. Gregory was on her right. Pastor Briggs and Corin were across from me. My mother stood up when I came in and she hugged me and she said, "Oh, baby, you look beautiful. I'm so glad you're here." The sigh, always the sigh. She smelled like Chanel Coco Mademoiselle, which she has worn since I was a child. For the first 90 minutes of the dinner, I behaved exactly the way I always behave. I complimented the food. I asked her clients polite questions. I laughed at Gregory's slightly inappropriate joke about the King's game. I drank 1 glass of wine. I let my mother touch my hair twice. I watched her glow in the attention. She was wearing a cream silk blouse and pearls, and she had had her hair done that afternoon. She looked genuinely radiant. She was the star of her own life. Around 8:15, during the main course, my mother stood up to give a small speech. She clinked her glass with a butter knife. She thanked everyone for coming. She thanked Gregory. She thanked the pastor. And then she said the sentence I had been waiting all night for her to say. She said, "And I want to thank my beautiful daughter Juno, who has been my whole world since the day she was born. I raised her by myself, as many of you know. It wasn't always easy, but she is the proof that a mother's love is enough." The table made the appropriate murmur. Gregory touched her hand. Corin Briggs, the pastor's wife, looked across the table at me with a warm, slightly sympathetic expression. She had heard the story before. Everyone had heard the story before. My mother had told the story at this woman's husband's church, on the day he married her and Gregory 6 years ago. My mother sat down. She reached for her wine glass. I said, "Mom, can I give you your gift now?" She beamed. She said, "Oh, of course, baby." I pulled the Joan Didion book out of the gift bag first. I slid it across the table to her, past the butter dish, past the bread basket, past her custom monogrammed menu. She picked it up. She made a small, delighted sound. "Oh, Juno, you remembered. Oh, thank you, baby. This is so thoughtful." She held it up to show the table. Everyone made the appropriate sounds. Then I pulled the manila envelope out of the gift bag. I said, "I have something else for you. I want you to open it here, in front of everyone." My mother's smile changed, only a little, only for a second. If you hadn't been watching her face for 29 years, you would have missed it. The air at the table changed. Something shifted. She said, "Oh, baby, what a sweet surprise." She took the envelope. She opened the flap. She pulled out what was inside. It was a single Polaroid. The one of my father holding me, dated October 14, 1994, in his blue ballpoint handwriting. I had made a color copy, large format, at the FedEx on J Street. The copy was 8.5 by 11. The handwriting on the bottom border was perfectly legible. Juno, 3 weeks old, Oct 14, 1994. My mother looked at it. She did not move. The table was quiet. Pastor Briggs leaned forward to see what it was. Corin Briggs, next to him, leaned over too. Gregory, confused, said, "What's that, Len?" My mother did not answer. I said very quietly, so only the people close to her could hear, "I met my Aunt Marisla last month, Mom. She gave me the Polaroids, all 41 of them." My mother's hand, holding the print, started to shake. And then Corin Briggs, who had been staring at the date in the blue ballpoint handwriting, said the sentence I will remember until I die. She said, in a normal speaking voice that carried across the whole private dining room, "Wait, that's 3 weeks after Juno was born. Lenora, you always said he was gone before she was a month old." I had not prepared that moment. I had not asked anyone to say that. A woman I had met twice, the wife of a pastor, looked at a date on a photograph and did the math out loud at a dinner table, and that was the moment my mother's 29-year story ended. Not because I said anything, not because I accused her of anything. Because another woman, a non-aligned third party, a kind church-going woman with reading glasses on a chain, looked at a photograph and said what the photograph plainly said. Gregory said, "Len, what is she talking about?" My mother tried to speak. She said, That's not what it seems. That's not what it seems, Juno. Your father, he came back. He came back once, and then he left again. Pastor Briggs said, "Lenora." My mother stopped. Pastor Briggs is a soft-spoken man in his 60s. He has been a pastor for 40 years. He has, I now imagine, heard a great deal of lying in his life. He looked at my mother with the specific expression of a pastor who has just watched a member of his congregation shatter. He said, "Lenora, what is the date on that photograph?" My mother did not answer. I said, "October 14th, 1994, 3 weeks and 2 days after I was born. He's holding me. You told everyone he was already gone." The private dining room was entirely silent. My mother stood up. She said, "Excuse me." She walked out of the room. She did not come back for 20 minutes. When she came back, her makeup had run and she had, I now know, spent the 20 minutes in the restaurant bathroom making 17 phone calls trying to find Aunt Mars's phone number. The dinner ended early. Guests left with small, bewildered apologies. Gregory sat at the table after everyone else was gone, staring at the Polaroid copy, and when my mother came back and tried to take his hand, he moved his hand away. Corin Briggs, on her way out, squeezed my shoulder and said very quietly, "Juno, I am so sorry." That was all she said. I think she was the only person at that table who said something to me. I will remember her for the rest of my life. I left before my mother did. I walked out to my Honda Civic and I drove home and I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and I let myself cry for about an hour. Not from triumph. I need you to understand that. From exhaustion. From the strange hollowness of having carried a lie my whole life without knowing I was carrying it, and then setting it down on a white tablecloth in the middle of a restaurant and walking away. Have you ever set a boundary and watched someone completely unravel because you stopped being convenient? Have you ever told the truth, not even accused anyone, just told the truth, calmly, with evidence, and watched the person who depended on your silence realize that silence was over? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. The next week moved very fast. On Monday morning, Theo Kwan filed 3 documents. He filed a motion in probate court in San Joaquin County to unseal my father's 1996 affidavit. He filed a notice with the electrician's union benefits office requesting a full accounting of the trust funds disbursed to my mother in 2008. And he filed a civil complaint in Sacramento County against my mother, seeking a constructive trust on the house in Carmichael, a full accounting and return of misappropriated funds with interest, and damages for breach of fiduciary duty. The complaint was 31 pages long. It was meticulous. Mr. Kwan had, over the previous 10 days, worked with a forensic accountant in Sacramento and a probate specialist in San Joaquin to prepare every single exhibit. The motions included certified copies of 41 dated Polaroids. By Wednesday, my mother had retained counsel, a man named Rabin Serrano out of a firm in Roseville. Mr. Serrano attempted to file a demurrer on the grounds that the statute of limitations had run. Mr. Kwan was ready for this. He had anticipated it. The statute of limitations on a constructive trust in California does not begin to run until the beneficiary has actual or constructive knowledge of the misappropriation. I had learned of the misappropriation 17 days ago when Aunt Mars handed me the shoebox. The statute clock had just started ticking. Mr. Serrano's demurrer was going nowhere. By Friday, the electricians' union benefits office had opened an internal investigation and had referred the matter to the San Joaquin County District Attorney's Office for review of a potential perjury charge. My mother had sworn, under penalty of perjury in 2008, that the trust funds would be used exclusively for my education and care. The DA's office requested her 2009 tax returns, her 2010 through 2024 mortgage statements on the Carmichael house, and her bank records for the 18 months after the trust funds were released. They got them. By the following Monday, my mother's real estate brokerage had learned about the civil complaint because Mr. Kwan's complaint had been picked up by a small legal news blog that tracks California probate cases. Her brokerage, which has a morals clause in its independent contractor agreements, suspended her real estate license pending an internal investigation into whether her fraudulent sworn statement to the electricians' union constituted conduct warranting termination. Her office removed her name from the website. They took down her sign in the Fair Oaks shopping center. 2 weeks after the dinner, Aunt Mars sent Gregory Hollies one of the Polaroids in the mail. She chose carefully. She sent the one from my first birthday, September 23, 1995, showing my father, my mother, and me, with my mother visibly laughing next to my father, her arm around his waist, his hand on the back of my high chair. The date was in the blue ballpoint handwriting. Jay's first, Sept 23, 1995. That photograph was taken 18 months after my mother claimed my father had walked out and never come back. Gregory had my mother's real estate documents. He had my mother's credit profile. He had, over the 6 years of their marriage, helped her refinance the Carmichael house twice, and each time she had told him the house had been paid for with a settlement from the aftermath of my father's abandonment. She had told him this in writing, in financial disclosure documents, as recently as 2022. Gregory filed for legal separation on a Tuesday in late October, 6 weeks after my mother's 60th birthday dinner. He retained his own attorney. He moved out of the Carmichael house. He sent me, through his attorney, a handwritten note that said only, "Juno, I am sorry. I should have asked more questions. I hope you can forgive me for not knowing. Gregory." I kept the note. I have not answered it. I don't know yet if I will. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't curious either, and incuriosity around a vulnerable child is its own kind of failure. I might answer him. I haven't decided. My mother called me 41 times over the course of the next 3 months. I answered 4 of those calls. The first call I took, she was crying. She said, "Juno, baby, please, please, I did it for you. I did everything for you. I didn't know how to tell you. Your father, he wasn't a good man for us. I was protecting you. I have always been protecting you, please." I let her say this for about 3 minutes. Then I said, "Mom, he wanted me. You didn't protect me. You took him from me so you could have his money. Everything else you've ever said about it is a story you told so you could live with yourself." She cried harder. She said, "Juno, I am your mother." I said, "I know," and I hung up. The second call I took, she was angry. She said, "You're destroying me. You're destroying my life. You're throwing me to the wolves over a box of old pictures." I said, "Mom, I didn't do any of this. You did all of this 29 years ago in your own handwriting, in your own signature. I just stopped covering for you." I hung up. The third call, she was calm. She said, "Juno, I want to make this right. I want to give you the house. I want to be done with the lawyers. Please, please drop the suit." I said, "Mom, the suit isn't about the house. The suit is about the last 29 years. You can give the house back, and that's between you and my lawyer. The rest is not something you can take back." I hung up. The fourth call, 2 weeks ago, she said, "Juno, are you happy?" I thought about that for a long time. I said, "No, Mom, I'm not happy. I'm tired. I'm tired like I've been tired my whole life and I didn't know why. But I'm not carrying your story anymore and that feels like being able to breathe. Please stop calling me. Write me a letter if you need to tell me something. I will read it when I am ready." I hung up. She has not written a letter. There is one more thing I want to tell you about because it matters. About 2 weeks after the dinner, my mother's own mother, my Russian grandmother, the one I barely knew, called me. She is 84 years old. She lives in an assisted living facility in Elk Grove. My mother had moved her there in 2015 and had, as far as I know, visited exactly twice. My grandmother said in her heavy accent, "Juno, your father was a good man. I told Lenora this. In 1996. In 1998. In 2001. I told her you should know your father. She stopped letting me see you too, you remember. You remember when you were 8 and suddenly we did not see each other. It was because I would not lie to you about your father. Juno, your father used to bring you to my apartment. When you were a baby, your mother did not know. He would sneak you over. He would hold you. I was there. I held you with him. I am sorry I did not fight harder. I was afraid of my own daughter." I drove out to see her the following weekend. I brought the Clark's shoebox. She went through the Polaroids one by one. When she got to the one of my father holding me at 3 weeks old, she said in Russian something I did not understand. Then she said in English, "This is from my kitchen in Fair Oaks. He brought you to my kitchen. Your mother told him she was working late. He brought you to me." She was crying. "I made borscht. You slept in my arms on the couch. This photograph was taken in my kitchen." I did not know. My grandmother, who I had been allowed to see only a handful of times as a child because my mother said she was difficult and unreliable, had been another casualty of the same campaign. My grandmother and I talk now every Sunday. She is teaching me to make pelmeni, my father's mother's recipe, passed to my grandmother from a woman she only met once at my parents' wedding in 1994. The dough is harder than it looks. The filling is pork and dill and onion. You pinch the edges very carefully. She says my father was the only person in my life who ever loved me without wanting anything back. I see Aunt Mars almost every other weekend now. She drives down from Stockton or I drive up to her. She has a small house on a quiet street near the old fairgrounds with a yard full of tomato plants and a rescue beagle named Pepper who sleeps on her feet. She has an entire closet full of my father's things. His work boots. A Carhartt jacket with his name written inside the collar in Sharpie. A box of tools he left at her house the last time he stayed with her in 2007. A small photo album she started for me in 1996, the year my mother cut him off, that she has added to every single year. There are clippings from newspapers, a program from his funeral, a napkin from a bar in Reno where he went on his last birthday. She kept all of it for me, a niece she didn't know if she'd ever meet, because she had promised her big brother she would. I asked her once why she didn't give up. She said, "Juno, your father wrote me one letter a month for 11 years. Every letter said the same thing at the bottom. Find her, tell her. You don't give up on that. You just don't." She gave me one of his Carhartt jackets for my birthday last month. It's too big for me. I wear it anyway, when I'm working in the garden on my patio. It smells like sawdust and old soap, and I think, when I have it on, about a man in a studio apartment in Reno writing his sister a letter once a month for 11 years, and then quietly dying at 45, believing he had lost. I am telling you this story because I want you to understand something. Peace doesn't come from revenge. It comes from finding out, one ordinary Tuesday, that you were loved by someone you never got to meet, and then standing up and refusing to pretend otherwise anymore. Real love doesn't ask you to erase anyone. It doesn't build itself on another person's silence. Sometimes the people who protect you aren't the ones standing in front of you. Sometimes they mailed a shoebox to their little sister in 1996 and asked her to find you when you were grown. And sometimes that little sister waits 17 years and shows up at your office on a Tuesday in a green Columbia rain jacket. My father's name was Dmitry Anatolievich Petrov. He was an electrician. He was the son of a Russian immigrant baker from Dayton, Ohio. He was 31 when he met my mother and 45 when he died. He loved my mother briefly. He loved me always. He held me at 3 weeks old in a kitchen in Fair Oaks, and he wrote the date on the bottom border in blue ballpoint ink because he was a man who believed that a photograph without a date was a photograph you would eventually forget. He made sure I would not forget. I have the shoebox on a shelf in my apartment now. I have the first edition Joan Didion book back because my mother returned it in a cardboard box with a handful of other items she had taken out of the Carmichael house. I don't know yet what I will do with the house when the court finally rules. My attorney thinks the ruling will come in the spring. I don't need a house. I might sell it. I might keep it as a rental and use the income to pay off my student loans. I haven't decided. My Aunt Mars says I should not decide anything quickly. She says my father would have wanted me to take my time. If you could protect one thing in your life, a person, a promise, a truth, what would it be? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. Because I think the people who protect us best are the people who plan for the days we can't see yet. The days when we'll need something to hold on to. The days when we'll need proof. If this story stayed with you, the one popping up on your screen right now is for you. 2 older sisters. A secret group chat about their younger sister. 4 years of it. Until one of them fat-fingered her into the thread. Tap the card.